What does it mean to be close to a king, but far from peace? To wear silk gowns, walk palace halls, and dine beside power only, to end in exile, disgrace, or worse. Behind the shining gold of the French courts were women whose lives shimmered with promise and ended in sorrow. In this quiet journey through time, we will uncover the secret lives of the royal mistresses of France. These women shaped politics, art, and fashion, but many paid a terrible price for their place beside the throne. Some were admired, some were feared, some were forgotten, and many were buried with secrets that history never fully told. Tonight, we will explore their stories one by one, from the soft footsteps of Agnes Sorel, the first official mistress of the crown, to the final breath of Madame du Barry, walking to the guillotine under a grey sky. You will discover how love at court could mean power, but also poison. How beauty could open palace doors and shut them forever. And how, in the shadows of kings, the most tragic fates often wore the brightest jewels. So, stay with us until the very end of this tale, because the stories that follow are not just history, they are warnings whispered in silk and lace. Welcome to Boring History for Sleep. If you enjoy quiet, thoughtful journeys through the past, make sure to subscribe. A new story awaits you every week. Now, let us begin. The year was 1444. France was recovering from war, still fractured by the shadows of betrayal and the chaos of the 100 Years' War. In the heart of the royal court, a young woman appeared, radiant and unlike any who had come before her. Her name was Agnes Sorel, and although she held no noble title at birth, she would soon reshape the role of women within the royal household forever. Agnes Sorel was born into the lesser nobility around the year 1422. Her family had modest means, but strong ties to the aristocracy. She was educated, poised, and exceptionally beautiful. Her eyes were said to be light and intelligent. Her features are delicate. Her bearing is magnetic. These qualities alone did not elevate her, but they placed her on the path. She first entered court as a lady-in-waiting to Isabel of Lorraine, the queen consort of René of Anjou. It was through this role that Agnes was eventually introduced to the French court of King Charles VII. France was still deeply wounded, its crown insecure, its people exhausted from years of fighting. Charles VII himself was a quiet and uncertain ruler, haunted by his father's madness and the humiliation of English domination. When Agnes came into his world, something shifted. Charles was immediately taken by her, not simply because she was beautiful, but because she was bold. Where others at court flattered and obeyed, Agnes stood with quiet confidence. She did not rush to please. She did not cower. She spoke with thoughtfulness and intelligence, and soon she became more than a companion. She became his confidant, his source of comfort, his advisor in private matters. She was not his wife. She never would be. Yet for the first time in French royal history, a woman was acknowledged not as a secret, but as a royal mistress officially recognized by the crown, housed in her apartments, adorned with titles and jewels. The court was stunned. Never before had a mistress been so openly embraced. Previous kings had taken lovers, yes, but always discreetly, always behind veils and rumors. Agnes changed that. She became the visible favorite. Her role was no longer hidden. It was displayed. She was the first woman in France to hold the unofficial but powerful title of Maitresse en titre, the king's chief mistress. And with that title came influence. Charles VII, once passive and uncertain, began to rule with more purpose. Some said it was Agnes who encouraged him to lead, who gave him the courage to take back lost lands and push the English back. He relied on her advice in both matters of the heart and the realm. She attended council meetings. She gave opinions on state appointments. She was more than an ornament. She was a participant. The people of France, however, were not always pleased. There were whispers in the cathedral halls, among the clergy, among the nobles. Many saw her presence as a disgrace. A woman without royal blood, now living in luxury, shaping decisions once left to ministers and advisers. She wore pearls and diamonds, gifts from the crown. Her gowns were extravagant. Her style became a fashion statement in Paris and beyond. She was bold in other ways. Too, it was said that she scandalized the court by exposing the tops of her breasts. In her gowns, not out of vulgarity, but to assert her presence. It was a statement, both daring and symbolic. She was not hiding. She belonged in those halls, whether others liked it or not. For some, Agnes was a symbol of decadence. For others, a muse, she became the subject of paintings, tapestries, and songs. Artists of the period were captivated by her image. And yet, behind the beauty was a woman constantly at risk. Her position, though envied, was fragile. She was not queen. She could be cast aside at any moment. She had no legal power, only influence. An influence in court could disappear with a single rumor. Despite this, Charles VII remained loyal to her. He gave her land. He made her the Dame de Bute. He fathered 4 children with her, and he shielded her from most attacks. But not all. In 1450, Agnes Sorel died suddenly, at the young age of 28. Her death shocked the court. She had appeared healthy just days before. At the time, her cause of death was said to be dysentery, perhaps brought on by childbirth complications. She had been pregnant with the king's 4th child, yet not everyone believed that story. Years later, forensic studies on her remains revealed the presence of mercurous substance sometimes used in cosmetic treatments at the time, but also a deadly poison. Had she used it as part of her beauty routine, or had someone administered it to her in secret? No one knows for certain, but her sudden death raised many questions. She had enemies at court. Envy was everywhere. It was not unthinkable that someone would want her removed, quietly, efficiently. Charles VII was devastated. He mourned her deeply. His letters spoke of her with longing and grief. He ordered a tomb built for her at Loches, carved in white stone. Her image, serene and still, was laid in eternal rest beside a llama symbol of innocence. He never named another official mistress. Not in the same way. Not with the same visibility. Agnes Sorel had opened a door that could never be closed. Again, after her, kings would continue to keep mistresses. Some would be loved, some would be feared, but none could claim to be the first. Her story is often softened by beauty and romance, but beneath the silks and diamonds was a woman constantly walking a tightrope between favor and exile, admiration and scandal. She was adored by the king and despised by many, lifted and then, possibly, cut down. And so, in the silent halls of French history, Agnes Sorel remains, not just as the first royal mistress, but as the one who gave the role shape, meaning, and danger. She did not just charm a king, she rewrote the rules of power at court. She was elegant, poised, and nearly 20 years older than the king who adored her. Diane de Poitiers was not simply a royal mistress. She was a force at the French court, a symbol of beauty, intellect, and quiet power. Her influence over King Henry II was not born from youthful charm, but from a deeper connection, one that mixed admiration with dependence, one that blurred the lines between passion and politics. Diane de Poitiers was born in 1499 to a noble family. She was well educated and refined. From an early age, she understood the rules of court life, the importance of appearances, discretion, and timing. At the age of 15, she was married to a much older nobleman, Louis de Breze. Their marriage gave her wealth and status. When he died in 1531, Diane chose to wear black and white in mourning colors she would keep for the rest of her life. The contrast would become her signature. It was not long after her husband's death that she began to rise in prominence at the French court. She became a lady-in-waiting to Queen Claude and later to Louise of Savoy. But her true influence began when she formed a bond with the young Prince Henry, the future King Henry II. He was just a child when she entered his life, a boy separated from his mother, left in the hands of others to be raised at court. Diane took a protective role, at first something between a mentor and a guardian. As Henry grew older, the relationship evolved. By the time he became king in 1547, their connection had deepened into love. Diane was 48, Henry was 28. Despite the age gap, he was devoted to her completely. In a court full of young and ambitious women, it was Diane who captured his loyalty. She became not only his mistress, but also his advisor, his confidant, and in many ways, his minister. Her influence reached into nearly every corner of his reign. Henry trusted her opinion more than that of his wife, his council, or even his generals. Diane's role was unusual. Most mistresses were kept at a distance from state matters. They were present for comfort, not counsel. But Diane advised on royal decrees. She helped select ministers. She even signed royal documents with the king's permission. Coins were minted with her image on one side and the king's on the other. Her initials intertwined with Henry's on royal emblems, buildings, and official works. She resided at the Château de Chenonceau, a grand estate gifted to her by Henry himself. Under her guidance, the chateau was transformed into a masterpiece of architecture and landscape. She filled it with art, gardens, and luxury. It was both her private retreat and a symbol of her reach. At court, Diane was calm, elegant, and always composed. She was known for her beauty, which she preserved through careful routines. She bathed in cold water, drank gold-infused elixirs, and followed strict diets. She rode horses daily and practiced archery well into her 60s. Her presence was dignified. Her words were measured. She understood how to command attention without raising her voice. But not everyone admired her. Queen Catherine de Medici, wife of Henry II, resented Diane's control. Though Catherine had borne the king 10 children, she remained in the background, largely ignored during Henry's reign. Diane, on the other hand, was always at his side. She chose the queen's jewelry. She arranged the schedules. She was often given precedence at public events. It was a quiet humiliation. Catherine was clever. She kept her anger hidden, knowing that any misstep could lead to disgrace. She watched, waited, and endured. Diane, for her part, maintained a careful relationship with the queen. She showed respect, at least in public, but everyone at court knew where real power lay. Henry II rarely made a major decision without first consulting Diane. Foreign ambassadors sought her favor. Ministers competed for her attention. Poets praised her in verse. She was the most powerful woman in France, yet power tied to affection is always uncertain. In 1559, King Henry II was injured during a jousting tournament. A wooden splinter from a shattered lance pierced his eye and skull. He suffered for 10 days before dying in agony. He was 40 years old. Diane was forbidden to see him as he lay dying. Queen Catherine, now freed from her long silence, took control. She barred Diane from entering the king's chambers. For the first time in years, Diane was powerless. Her influence ended the moment Henry closed his eyes for the last time. After the king's death, Catherine acted quickly. She demanded that Diane return all jewels and gifts given by the king. She forced Diane to leave the Château de Chenonceau. It was taken from her and handed to Catherine herself. Diane was exiled to the Château d'Anet, a quiet estate in the countryside there. She lived out the rest of her days in relative peace, but without the grandeur that had once defined her life. The court no longer listened to her. Her name faded from daily conversation. The woman who had once guided a king now spent her days in solitude. She died in 1566 at the age of 66. Even in death, her story remained unique. Decades later, when her body was exhumed during the French Revolution, scientists discovered high levels of gold in her remains. It confirmed the long-standing rumor that she had regularly consumed liquid gold, believing it would preserve her youth. This ritual, once seen as elegant and mystical, may have contributed to her decline. Diane de Poitiers remains one of the most fascinating women in French history, not because she seduced a king, but because she ruled beside him in a way no other mistress had before. She was not loud, she was not scandalous, she did not seek titles or thrones. She simply placed herself at the center of the king's world, and stayed there, steady and strong, until the day his reign ended. The late 16th century was a time of deep division in France. The country had been torn apart by religious wars for decades. Protestants and Catholics fought in towns, cities, and royal courts. Kings had been assassinated. Families had turned against each other. The throne was shaky, and trust was rare. Into this world came Gabrielle d'Estrées, a woman of grace, charm, and quiet determination. She would not only become the mistress of King Henry IV, but also one of the few women who changed the course of French history through love. Gabrielle was born around 1573 into a noble family. Her father, Antoine d'Estrées, was a respected military man, and her mother served in the royal household. Gabrielle grew up in a world of etiquette, ceremony, and constant attention to appearances. She was educated, well-mannered, and admired from a young age for her soft beauty. Her hair was pale gold. Her eyes held a calm confidence. She carried herself with elegance, even as a child. As she matured, Gabrielle became known in courtly circles for her refinement. She was married young, as most noblewomen were, but the union was not based on love. Her husband, Nicolas d'Amarvel, was from a good family, but their relationship was distant. Gabrielle spent little time with him. Her place in life would come not through marriage, but through her connection to the crown. Henry IV of France was a complex figure. Born Protestant, he had converted to Catholicism for political reasons. His reign began in 1589, following a long and violent struggle for the throne. France was exhausted. Its people longed for peace. Henry was a warrior king, clever and pragmatic, but even kings grow tired of battles. When he met Gabrielle, he found not just a companion, but a calm center amid the storm. Their relationship began quietly in 1591. Henry was drawn to her grace, but more than that, he was drawn to her steadiness. Gabrielle did not flatter him endlessly. She did not compete for attention. She listened. She spoke with care. She seemed untouched by the drama of court life. And over time, she became the person Henry trusted most. He gave her gifts, titles, and a place at his side. But their bond went far beyond affection. Gabrielle began to shape his thoughts on policy, faith, and peace. She encouraged him to take steps toward healing the religious divide in France. Henry had long resisted converting fully to Catholicism. His heart remained with the Protestant faith of his youth. But Gabrielle saw what others could not. She knew that if he wanted to unite the country, he would need to make a sacrifice. She gently urged him to consider the needs of the people, to think beyond personal belief. In time, Henry made the famous statement, "Paris is worth a mass." In 1593, he converted to Catholicism, an act that ended years of civil war. While historians debate how much Gabrielle influenced that decision, most agree that her presence played a key role. Henry's conversion opened the path to his official coronation as king. The country began to settle. Trade returned. Churches reopened. Families that had hidden in fear now stepped back into public life. Gabrielle became more than a mistress. She was seen as a savior by many. She had helped bring peace, not through war, but through words. The court, however, did not always welcome her influence. Many nobles saw Gabrielle as a threat. She was not royal. She had no high birth. Yet she walked beside the king, advised him, and lived with him openly. She was given estates, jewels, and servants. She bore him 3 children. Their relationship was not hidden. Henry even referred to her as his true wife. He gave her the title Marquise de Monceau, then Duchesse de Beaufort. In public, she wore the royal blue reserved for queens. Henry planned to marry her. He had his marriage to Marguerite de Valois annulled. He arranged for Gabrielle's rise to queen to become official. The ceremony was scheduled. The wedding would take place within weeks. Gabrielle, now pregnant again, was preparing for her new life not as a mistress, but as the Queen of France. But fate stepped in. In April of 1599, just days after receiving the king's engagement ring, Gabrielle fell ill. She was dining at the home of a friend when she suddenly collapsed. She experienced severe pain, then convulsions. She was taken to a nearby monastery for care. Nothing could be done. Within days, she was dead. Her unborn child had also died. She was 25 years old. The court was stunned. Whispers filled the corridors. Some believed it was natural. Others suspected poison. Gabrielle had many enemies. Some feared her becoming queen. Her sudden illness, her violent symptoms, they raised too many questions. No one was ever charged. No proof was found. But the mystery remained. Henry was devastated. He locked himself in his rooms for days. He refused to eat. He wore black instead of royal mourning colors. He cried openly before his council. He had loved Gabrielle deeply. Her death broke something in him. He arranged for her to be buried with honors reserved for royalty. At her funeral, he declared she had been the one woman who truly knew his heart. She was laid to rest in the Abbey of Maubuisson. Her tomb was elegant and simple. A carved effigy of her lay in peace, her hands folded, her face calm. No crown, no title, but remembered all the same. Henry never made another woman queen. He remarried later for political alliance, but the love he had shared with Gabrielle was never repeated. She had been his guide during France's darkest years. Her death marked the end of something, an age of personal counsel, quiet love, and genuine influence. Today, Gabrielle d'Estrées is remembered in paintings and letters. Her image, once captured in the famous portrait where she is seen with her sister, is still studied by art historians. Her story is not one of scandal or ambition, but of patience, peace, and a life cut short. Versailles was a world of light, music, and mirrors. Behind its gilded walls, everything sparkled except the truth. Beneath the silk curtains and marble floors, ambition whispered in every hallway. At the center of this dazzling court stood Françoise Athena S. de Rochedouart de Mortemart, better known to history as Madame de Montespan. More than a mistress, she was a ruler in all but name. Her beauty was famous. Her charm was unmatched. Her ambition was legendary. But even the brightest stars can fall, and when they do, they fall hard. Born in 1640 into a noble but not especially powerful family, Athena S. was raised in the tradition of high birth and careful grooming. She was intelligent and quick-witted. Her family belonged to the ancient House of Mortemart, respected for its lineage and sharp tongue. From an early age, she showed a remarkable ability to win attention and to keep it. She entered the court of Louis XIV first as a maid of honor. She married the Marquis de Montespan and soon became one of the most admired women in the palace. Her beauty, wit, and ease with conversation made her a favorite among nobles and artists. But it was her entrance into the king's private life that changed her fate forever. Louis XIV, the Sun King, ruled with splendor. His court revolved around him. He admired intellect and elegance in equal measure. Madame de Montespan had both. Their affair began around 1667, while he was still involved with another mistress, Louise de la Vallière. But Athena S. quickly eclipsed all others. She was bold, confident, and unafraid of court politics. Where others blushed and bowed, she laughed and led. She became the king's most powerful mistress, the maîtresse en titre. Her apartments at Versailles were lavish. She hosted extravagant parties. Music, theatre, and fashion flowed through her chambers. Poets praised her. Ministers feared her. Even queens avoided direct conflict with her. She was not just the king's lover. She became a central figure in royal decision-making. She bore Louis XIV 7 children, several of whom were later legitimized and given noble titles. Their relationship was not hidden. Everyone at court knew that she held the king's heart and his ear. She was said to have influenced state policy, appointments, and foreign affairs. Ambassadors sent gifts to her, hoping to secure her favor. Her power was immense, but it was also fragile. The court was filled with jealousy. Noble families who had spent generations trying to gain royal attention now had to pass through Madame de Montespan. Women who once held court found themselves sidelined. Even ministers resented the sway she held over the king. Whispers began to circulate, and in Versailles, whispers were dangerous. In the 1670s, a dark cloud began to form over her world. Rumors spread of strange rituals, hidden potions, and mysterious visitors. Names were mentioned. Accusations flew. A scandal erupted, one that would come to be known as the Affair of the Poisons. The affair began with an investigation into the deaths of several nobles. Allegations of poisonings and black magic shook the city. A secret tribunal was formed to investigate. Dozens were arrested. Some confessed to using powders, charms, and even infant blood in attempts to gain love or eliminate rivals. Among the names that surfaced was Madame de Montespan. Witnesses claimed she had that she had used love potions to keep the king's favor. Some even said she had taken part in dark rituals involving prayers to demons and sacrifices. It was never proven, but the stain of suspicion lingered. Louis XIV never publicly accused her, but he began to distance himself. Her influence started to fade. By the early 1680s, a new woman had appeared in the king's life, Madame de Maintenon, quieter, more religious, and very different from Montespan. Athena S. remained at court for a time, but her role had changed. She no longer hosted the grand events. Her apartments were quieter. Her rivals had grown bolder. She saw the king less and less. Eventually, she retired from public life altogether. She withdrew to a convent in 1691, where she lived under religious discipline. Though not officially forced, the move was expected. It was understood that her time had passed. The woman who once commanded the gaze of the most powerful man in Europe now lived in quiet prayer, even in retreat. She remained proud. Visitors to the convent described her as dignified, still elegant, and always aware of who she had been. She received letters from her children and maintained her household in modest comfort. But the days of silk gowns and midnight dances were over. She died in 1707 at the age of 66. Her body was laid to rest in the chapel of the convent. The Sun King did not attend her funeral. The story of Madame de Montespan is often told in flashes perfume, laughter, scandal, and suspicion. But behind the legend was a woman who understood power better than most. She knew how to hold it, how to use it, and how it could vanish without warning. At Versailles, nothing was permanent. Not love, not favor, not even a queen's envy could match the speed at which power changed hands. And for Madame de Montespan, whose rise was as fast as her fall, the golden halls of the palace would always remember her, not just as a mistress, but as a storm that once passed through them. She did not arrive at court with diamonds or fame. She wore no crown. She made no entrance. Françoise d'Orbigan, the woman history would know as Madame de Maintenon, slipped into the world of Versailles quietly. She began as a widow, then a governess, and finally, though never publicly a queen in all but name. Her story was not born from beauty or scandal, but from patience, faith, and endurance. Françoise d'Orbigan was born in 1635 into a family fallen from grace. Her father was imprisoned for debt. Her early years were marked by poverty and instability. She spent part of her childhood in the French Caribbean, then returned to France, where she was raised by relatives in strict religious circles. Her life was not filled with laughter or indulgence. It was shaped by silence, discipline, and a deep sense of duty. At 16, she married Paul Scarron, a well-known poet and playwright. He was crippled, witty, and more than 20 years her senior. Their marriage was unusual, but through it, Françoise gained entry into intellectual circles in Paris. After his death, she was left with limited financial support, yet she remained connected to powerful families and lived a modest life, marked by reading, prayer, and thoughtful conversation. Her life changed dramatically when she was appointed governess to the illegitimate children of King Louis XIV and his then mistress, Madame de Montespan. At first, it seemed like another modest role caring for children, far from the spotlight. But Françoise brought more than care. She brought structure, dignity and calm to a world filled with chaos. She taught the children not only letters and manners, but also humility. She organized their daily routines. She treated them with fairness and warmth. The king noticed. Louis XIV, still in the full brilliance of his reign, admired women who were intelligent and refined. As his relationship with Madame de Montespan began to fade, troubled by scandal and the affair of the poisons, he turned more often to Francoise. Their conversations were quiet, often about faith, family, and the future of France. Over time, admiration grew into affection. Unlike his previous mistresses, Francoise did not seek attention. She avoided public displays. She never interrupted or overstepped. Instead, she listened. She advised with care. She held herself with grace. The king, perhaps wearied by years of spectacle, found peace in her presence. Around 1683, shortly after the death of Queen Maria Theresa, Louis XIV and Francoise were secretly married. The marriage was never formally announced. She never received the title of queen. But those close to the court knew her status had changed. She was no longer merely the governess. She was now the king's companion, his trusted wife in all but public name. Her new position gave her influence, but not the kind that glittered. Madame de Maintenon had no interest in lavish parties or golden halls. She brought restraint to Versailles. Under her quiet guidance, the court grew more serious. Theatres were tamed. Dresses became more modest. Courtiers were expected to show dignity, not decadence. Gossip, once the currency of the palace, was no longer welcome in her presence. She promoted religion, order, and responsibility. She worked to reform the moral character of the court. She encouraged the king to pursue a more devout life. She supported the building of churches, the education of poor girls, and the strengthening of Catholic traditions. One of her greatest achievements was the founding of the Maison Royale de Saint-Louis, a school for the daughters of impoverished nobility. Located at Saint-Cyr, it offered education, discipline, and opportunity to girls who might otherwise have been forgotten. She oversaw the curriculum and visited often. It became a model of faith-based education, but not everyone admired her. Many at court resented her quiet control. They called her severe, cold, and joyless. She had no noble birth. She did not sparkle at banquets. She did not encourage music or flirtation. To the younger generation of courtiers, Versailles under Madame de Maintenon had grown dull. Her moral reforms were seen as repressive. Her dislike of court excess made her unpopular with those who thrived on luxury. Though she held the king's heart, she was often isolated. She had few close friends. She did not entertain lavishly. She kept a small circle of trusted advisors. Her relationship with the king's children was respectful but not affectionate. Many of them missed the earlier, more carefree days of Versailles, filled with laughter, not lessons. Despite the criticisms, Madame de Maintenon remained at the center of the king's life for more than 30 years. She was with him through triumphs and failures. She shared his private joys and his public burdens. She offered him comfort as his body aged, as his wars dragged on, and as France changed around them. She had strong views on religion. She supported the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685, which ended the legal rights of Protestants in France. This decision led to hardship and exile for thousands. Some historians argued that her influence pushed the king toward intolerance. Others suggest she simply reflected the mood of the time. What is clear is that her faith shaped her worldview, and it shaped policy. As Louis XIV grew older, he grew more reflective. His court became quieter. The endless parties of his youth were replaced by hours of prayer and reflection. Madame de Maintenon was by his side until the very end. When the king died in 1715, she did not claim privilege. She did not seek a legacy. Instead, she withdrew to St. Cyr, the school she had built and loved. She lived there in peace, reading, writing letters, and speaking with students. She had no titles, no servants in gold. She was simply Madame de Maintenon, teacher, widow, and former wife of a king. She died in 1719 at the age of 80-3. In portraits, she is shown seated in simple clothing, her expression serene, no crown, no jewels, just folded hands and calm eyes. She was never painted as a queen, yet she lived as one silently, steadily, in the background of one of Europe's most powerful reigns. Her legacy was not in battles or laws, but in the moral tone she brought to a court once known for excess. She did not dazzle, but she endured. And in the ever-turning world of Versailles, where fame was fragile and favor fleeting, that was perhaps the rarest gift of all. She never wore a crown, she never sat on a throne. But in the lavish, mirrored halls of Versailles, Madame de Pompadour held a place that few queens ever truly achieved. She was the heart of French culture during the reign of Louis XV, a mistress, yes, but also an advisor, a visionary, a patron, and at times the most powerful woman in the kingdom. Her name stirred admiration, envy, and hatred. She was not born to rule, but somehow she did. Her story began far from royal privilege. Jeanne Antoinette Poisson was born in 1721 in Paris to a family of modest means. Her father, a financier, fled the country under charges of fraud when she was still young, leaving her mother to raise her alone. From the start, her life was shaped by ambition, pressure, and whispers of destiny. A fortune-teller once told her mother that Jeanne Antoinette would one day become the mistress of the king. It was a bold prophecy, but her mother believed it and raised her daughter accordingly. She was given the best education money could buy. Tutors taught her literature, painting, music, and manners. She learned how to walk, talk, laugh, and think like a noble woman, and she learned how to listen. By the time she was a teenager, she was already known in Parisian salons for her grace and intelligence. Her beauty was delicate fine features, porcelain skin, soft eyes, but it was her wit that captured attention. She married a wealthy man, Charles Guillaume Lenormant d'Etioles, and entered the upper social circles of Paris. But her eyes were set on the court, and in 1745 her chance came. Louis XV, the most powerful man in France, met her at a masked ball at Versailles. She wore a pink gown. The king, bored and restless, noticed her. She was not like the others. She did not fawn, but smiled. She did not flatter, but spoke easily. Within weeks, she was summoned to court. The king had had mistresses before, but Jeanne Antoinette was different. She was not just beautiful, she was clever, poised, and confident in the way only someone fully prepared could be. The king gave her the title Marquise de Pompadour. She moved into Versailles, into the heart of power. It was a place where few women were welcome, but she entered it with the quiet calm of someone who knew she belonged. Her influence grew quickly. Within a year, she was not only Louis's mistress, but his closest confidant. She organized court events, advised on state matters, and even sat in on meetings with ministers. She spoke with generals, scholars, and foreign dignitaries. Louis XV, known for his indecision, relied on her to help him think. Her role became something new, part companion, part counselor, part shadow queen. She promoted the arts with tireless passion. Under her guidance, the court became a place of elegance, not just politics. She supported painters like Boucher, sculptors, and cabinet makers. She helped establish the porcelain factory at Sèvres, which produced the most refined ceramics. In Europe, her taste influenced fashion, architecture, and interior design. She had a gift for beauty and a clear vision for France's cultural future. She also supported the Enlightenment. Philosophers like Voltaire and Diderot found protection in her. She read their works. She invited them to her salons. She believed that ideas were just as important as paintings and poetry. Through her influence, the French court, once stiff and narrow, became more open to new thinking. She saw art and reason as twin paths to national greatness. But as her power grew, so did resentment. She was a commoner by birth. To the noble families of France, her presence was an insult. She had no royal blood, yet she gave orders. She planned military appointments. She shaped diplomacy. Many in court saw her as a dangerous influence over the king. Outside the palace, pamphlets mocked her. They called her greedy, manipulative, even a witch. Her face appeared in cruel drawings. Rumors spread that she controlled the king through spells and potions. She bore the hatred in silence. Even as her romantic relationship with Louis faded, their bond remained strong. She no longer shared his bed, but she shared his thoughts. He still relied on her for advice. She arranged his social affairs. She helped select new mistresses, managing them so they never threatened her position. She understood the court as few did, and she used that understanding to protect her influence behind closed doors. Though her life was more fragile than many realized, her health was poor. She suffered from headaches, fatigue, and nervous illnesses. She often took long retreats to her estate at Bellevue to rest. She read constantly. She wrote letters, but she was lonely. The very power she had gained had isolated her. Many of her former friends had turned away. Even her family sometimes stayed at a distance. The court feared her, but it did not love her. She tried to do good with her influence. She helped the poor. She encouraged education. She raised money for hospitals. But the public image of her remained cruel. For many, she became the symbol of royal waste and arrogance. During the 7 Years' War, as France suffered defeat after defeat, she was blamed. People believed that a mistress had no place shaping military decisions. They wanted her gone. The king did not send her away. He continued to support her, even when it cost him popularity. He gave her gifts. He visited her when she was ill. In private, he called her his dear friend. She remained at court, but the glow around her began to dim. The salons grew quieter. Her laughter became rare. Her smile was more forced. By 1764, her illness had worsened. Doctors could do little. She grew thinner. Her strength faded. She still dressed with care, still spoke gently. But death had come close. The court knew it. The king knew it. And she knew it. She died in April of that year. She was 40-2. The king stood at the window of his private rooms as her coffin passed. It was raining. He did not speak. He only watched. Then he turned and walked away. She was buried in the Capuchin convent in Paris. There was no royal ceremony, no great monument. But in the king's heart, she had left a mark. In the halls of Versailles, her presence lingered. In the arts of France, her name remained. She had worn no crown, but for nearly 2 decades she had shaped a kingdom. She was the last, the final glittering figure in a long line of royal mistresses who walked the golden halls of Versailles. Madame du Barry was the last to hold the king's affection, the last to enjoy the lavish attention of court, and the last to fall, brought down not by scandal or age, but by the fury of a nation in revolt. Her name was Jean Beck. She was not born into nobility, nor was she raised in wealth or grandeur. She came into the world in 1743, in the small town of Vauquelin, the illegitimate daughter of a seamstress. Her beginnings were modest, even poor. She had no coat of arms, no family estate, no title to boast of. From her earliest years, the world she would one day enter seemed impossible to reach. But she was beautiful, strikingly so. Her features were soft, her skin pale and smooth, her eyes bright and playful. More than that, she had charm. Not the polished manners of a duchess, but the easy grace of someone who could adapt, laugh, and read a room. She knew how to speak, without saying too much, how to flatter without seeming false. These were gifts that would carry her far as a teenager. Jean worked in a dressmaker's shop in Paris, assisting noblewomen with gowns and accessories. She watched them closely, mimicked their speech, and learned their habits. She knew how to carry herself, how to move, how to smile in just the right way. She was often surrounded by wealthy clients, and it wasn't long before she caught the attention of powerful men. She became a courtesan, though that word was never used in public. Wealthy admirers supported her. She attended parties and salons. She was escorted in carriages, draped in fine silks and jewels. Through one of her benefactors, the Comte du Barry, she was introduced to court circles. Her real name would have caused scandal, so she was given a new identity, Madame du Barry. In 1768, she was presented to King Louis XV. The king was aging. By then, more withdrawn and weary than during the days of Pompadour. His appetite for politics had faded. He no longer sought clever conversation or deep companionship. He wanted ease, laughter, distraction. Madame du Barry offered all of that. She was young, beautiful, and uncomplicated. The king fell for her quickly. He arranged for her to be married to a nobleman, artificial union that gave her the necessary title to be formally received at court. Once she became Comtesse du Barry, she was officially installed as his mistress. Her rise was fast, public, and deeply controversial. Versailles did not welcome her with open arms. The court was horrified by her origins. She was not educated. She was not born into nobility. She had worked for a living something nearly unthinkable among the upper ranks of France. The other courtiers, especially the women, treated her with thinly veiled disgust. They whispered behind fans. They refused to speak to her. Some would not even look at her directly. Even Marie Antoinette, the young Dauphine who would later become queen, refused to acknowledge her presence at first. It was beneath her, she believed, to speak to someone so low in birth. This created tension between the queen and the king, and between the factions of the court who supported or despised Madame du Barry. Still, she remained. Louis XV adored her. He showered her with jewels, gowns, and estates. He gave her a luxurious apartment near his own. She hosted private dinners and amusements, attended by a select circle of favorites. She had no political ambition. She did not try to control ministers or influence foreign policy. Her power came from pleasure, not politics. And yet, Her presence was power enough. Madame du Barry was, in many ways, the opposite of Pompadour. Where Pompadour had been intellectual and refined, du Barry was lively and light. Where Pompadour had filled her time with philosophy and art, patronage, du Barry enjoyed fashion, music, and entertainment. She was mocked for her ignorance, but those close to her spoke of her kindness, her generosity, and her genuine affection for the king. Despite her critics, she became the most visible. Woman at court, her wardrobe was extravagant, her jewelry unmatched. She wore diamonds in her hair, pearls on her wrists, and lace spun finer than mist. Artists painted her in soft pastels, reclining in silks or framed by roses. She became a symbol of luxury, admired by some, despised by others. But time moved on, and so did fate. In 1774, King Louis XV fell ill with smallpox. Madame du Barry remained by his side until he ordered her removed. As he faced death, he turned back to religion and asked that she be sent away. It was the last time she would see him. He died soon after, and with his death, her life at court ended. The new king, Louis XVI, and his queen, Marie Antoinette, had no place for du Barry. She was banished from Versailles and sent to live at the Abbey of Pontardames. After a time, she was allowed to return to her private estate, Louveciennes, where she lived in quiet retirement. She still received guests, wrote letters, and collected art, but the glittering world she had once ruled over was gone. Then came the Revolution. By the late 1780s, France was in chaos. The people were angry, bread was scarce, taxes were high, nobles were targets. The king and queen had lost the love of the people, and the Palace of Versailles had become a symbol of everything wrong with the old order. Though Madame du Barry had long since left court, she was not forgotten. Her name was still associated with excess, privilege, and royal corruption. Revolutionaries believed she had hoarded wealth, aided enemies of the Republic, and lived too well while others starved. In 1793, she was arrested and charged with treason. The trial was brief and brutal. She was accused of sending money and jewels to royalist exiles abroad, though much of the evidence was circumstantial. Her pleas were ignored. Her past, her reputation, and her wealth had already condemned her. She was sentenced to death. On December 8, 1793, Jean Becue, once the mistress of a king, was led through the streets of Paris in a cart. Her golden hair had been cut. Her hands were tied. The crowd watched in silence. She wept openly, begging for her life. Witnesses said she cried out for mercy, even as she climbed the steps of the scaffold. She was 49 years old. The blade fell. Her body was buried in a mass grave, her name listed among thousands of others lost during the Reign of Terror. Madame du Barry's story is one of contrasts, rags and riches, love and loneliness, silk and blood. She rose from nothing, became the most envied woman in France, and died with no honor, no title, and no comfort. Her life reflects not only the cruelty of the court, but also the cruelty of the revolution that followed. She was the last to stand beside a king in the age of mistresses, and she was the first to face the guillotine for it. The French court has seen many mistresses, some adored, others feared. Some ruled with charm, others with silence, but few left behind a trail as fiery and tragic as Françoise Babou de la Bourdonnais. Her name is not widely known today, yet her life lit up the 16th century with scandal, passion, and violence. She was remembered not for shaping politics or culture, but for pushing every boundary of behavior a noblewoman could. And in the end, her life ended in the most public and brutal way imaginable, murdered in broad daylight. A mistress struck down by the hand of rage. Françoise was born in the mid-1500s into a family that already knew how to navigate the dangerous waters of royal favor. The Babou family had connections in the court of Catherine de' Medici, one of the most formidable women in French history. Françoise's mother, Isabeau de la Bordesière, was known for her charm, and several of Françoise's relatives would also become royal favorites, but none of them lived the way Françoise did. From the start, she stood apart. Descriptions of her from that time tell of a woman with striking beauty and a sharp tongue. She was educated, intelligent, and unafraid to speak her mind. She knew how to draw attention, and she loved it. She danced at the most glamorous balls, wore the boldest fashions, and left a trail of whispered stories behind her wherever she went. In the careful, guarded world of the French nobility, Françoise was wild. She married Antoine d'Estrées, a powerful nobleman with influence and ambition. It was a political match, as many were. But Françoise was not the type to settle into the quiet role of a countess. Her heart and her attention often wandered. Affairs were common in court life. Discretion was expected, but infidelity was rarely shocking. Françoise, however, did not believe in hiding. She flaunted her lovers. She paraded them through court events, and she made little effort to disguise her passions. She had no loyalty to appearances, no fear of consequences, and she had many admirers, young men drawn in by her beauty, older men seduced by her wit. One of her lovers was a man named Duguist, a nobleman close to King Henry III. Their affair burned hot and public. At court, it was all anyone could talk about. Her husband, Antoine, was humiliated, but he remained silent for a time. Divorce was not common. Scandal could ruin reputations, but it rarely ended careers unless things turned violent. And with Françoise, things often did. She was known for her temper. When insulted, she did not retreat, she attacked. She had been seen striking servants, cursing at rivals, and throwing objects in anger. She once slapped a woman in public for mocking her dress. Her rages became legendary. People admired her beauty, but feared her presence. She did not act like a lady was expected to. She acted like someone determined to live by her own rules. The court of Henry III was already a place of uncertainty. The king himself was eccentric, and France was suffering under religious wars and internal strife. In that climate, any disruption could cause lasting damage, and Françoise, with her sharp tongue and shameless behavior, was a storm waiting to strike. Her downfall came suddenly. In the year 1592, the simmering tension around her exploded. Her affair with Duguist had ended badly, and new rumors linked her to another nobleman, this one married. The man's wife, furious and humiliated, begged her husband to take action. But instead of challenging Françoise's new lover, the wronged husband chose to confront the woman at the center of the scandal. On a bright morning, Françoise left her house to attend a church service in Paris. She wore a dark cloak and was accompanied by only a few servants. As she stepped onto the street, she was approached by the husband of her rival. His name has faded from memory, but his actions did not. He did not speak. He pulled a dagger from his coat and stabbed Françoise in the chest. She screamed, staggered, and tried to fight back, but the wounds were deep. Witnesses rushed forward. Some tried to help, others simply watched in horror. Her servants attempted to stop the man, But it was too late. He fled the scene, leaving her bleeding in the street. She died there, in public. Before help could arrive, the court was shaken. Never before had a mistress of her status been murdered so publicly. The news spread quickly. Some were horrified. Others, quietly, felt she had brought it upon herself. Gossip painted her death as the final act of a life lived too wildly. Her enemies whispered that she had finally gone too far. Her supporters mourned her as a woman too bold for her time. The king, though shocked, did not launch a major investigation. The killer disappeared from history, likely shielded by powerful allies. No justice was served, no trial was held, and Francoise was buried without honors. Her name was not spoken often in the months that followed. It was as though the court wanted to erase the memory of her chaos. But memory lingers. Francoise Babou's life became a cautionary tale. Her story was repeated in quiet corners, among women told to behave with grace and caution. Her name became linked to recklessness, to scandal, and to downfall. Yet she was also admired, in secret, by those who wished they too could break free from the roles they were born into. Her legacy was not one of political power or cultural influence. She left no letters of wisdom, no poems, no paintings, but she left behind something else, proof of what happens when a woman refuses to be silent. Even in a world that demands obedience, she lived boldly, she loved without apology, and she died. Not in a bed surrounded by prayers, but on the street, under the open sky, with the blood of passion and betrayal marking her end. In the grand halls of French power, not all influenced wore a crown or arrived in public view. Some operated behind the curtains, in whispered meetings, secret letters, and glances that meant more than words. Marie de Rohan, Duchess of Chevreuse, belonged to that world. A noblewoman by birth, she moved with grace among the elite, but her true talent lay not in fashion or beauty, it lay in schemes. Beneath her polished surface was a mind as sharp as any general's, as ambitious as any minister's. Her power was quiet, indirect, and dangerous. Born in 1600, Marie entered life at a time when France was dominated by intrigue. The country was under the rule of young Louis XIII, with his powerful mother Marie de Medici, and later Cardinal Richelieu guiding policy. Court life was not just about etiquette and rank. It was a battlefield. Nobles vied for power, influence, and the king's ear. In this world, words could kill just as easily as swords. Marie was born into the high nobility. Her father was the Duke of Montbazon, and her family held vast lands and an ancient name. From an early age, she was exposed to the rules of court. Life, she was taught to dance, to converse, to read, and to write with style. But she also learned how to observe, to read people, and to listen when others thought she wasn't paying attention. She developed a deep understanding of what drove men, and how women could shape those desires. Her first rise came through marriage. In 1617, she married Charles d'Albert, the Duke of Lunens, one of King Louis XIII's closest favorites. This gave her immediate access to the center of royal power. She became a lady-in-waiting to Queen Anne of Austria, the young and lonely Spanish-born wife of the French king. Marie and Anne became close, so close that many believed their bond was more than friendship. Whether it was deep sisterhood or romantic affection, no one could say for sure. But it was strong, and it would change both their lives. Marie was fiercely loyal to Anne. She defended the queen in every conversation, shielded her from gossip, and helped her navigate the cold court of her husband. But she also saw an opportunity. As the Queen's favorite, Marie could act on her behalf, or more precisely on her behalf, under the Queen's name. And so she did. She quickly became involved in political plots. Marie despised Cardinal Richelieu, the powerful chief minister, who aimed to reduce the power of the nobility and centralize authority around the king. She saw him as a threat not just to her class, but to her influence. From her position beside the Queen, she began to work against him. She formed secret alliances with nobles, foreign ambassadors, and even members of the royal family. She passed letters, spread rumors, and encouraged opposition. Richelieu knew she was a threat, but she was clever. She never left her fingerprints. Whenever someone close to her was exposed in a conspiracy, Marie slipped away, untouched. She made herself too valuable to be punished openly, too well connected to be easily removed. But her boldness grew. In 1626, she was implicated in the Chalet conspiracy, a plot to assassinate Richelieu and remove him from power. Though she avoided trial, she was exiled from court. It would be the first of several times she would be sent away. She always returned. Exile didn't stop her. While away from court, she wrote letters, hosted gatherings, and continued to plot. She kept in contact with foreign diplomats. She coordinated with the Spanish and English courts, even during times of war. Her loyalty to Queen Anne never wavered, but her loyalty to France often shifted, depending on what would best weaken Richelieu's grip. She returned to court in 1628, but remained under suspicion. Still, she managed to influence decisions behind the scenes. When Richelieu died in 1642, many thought her days of exile and conspiracy were over. But another powerful figure soon rose, Cardinal Mazarin, Richelieu's protege, and Marie's. Old battles continued under a new name. In the following years, France was thrown into turmoil. The Fronde, a series of civil wars, erupted across the country. Nobles, commoners, and parliamentarians fought for control. Marie saw this as her moment. She joined the rebels. She traveled across Europe, seeking support from Spain and England. She moved between provinces with speed and secrecy, coordinating resistance against the crown's ministers. Once again, she was exiled. Once again, she returned. By now, her name was synonymous with intrigue. Her beauty had faded somewhat with age, but her mind remained sharp. She continued to write coded letters, host secret meetings, and play her enemies against each other. But her influence was beginning to wane. The court grew weary of her games. New favorites rose, with fresher faces and simpler motives. The Queen. She had once served so faithfully, Anne of Austria, now held regency power as the mother of the young Louis XIV. But even Anne, once her closest friend, began to distance herself. Marie had become too dangerous, too unpredictable. In time, her access to court was cut off completely. Her final years were quiet. She lived far from Versailles, in the countryside, removed from the grandeur and power she once commanded. She was still wealthy, still noble, but forgotten by many. The letters stopped. The visitors grew fewer. The world of whispers and schemes she had once mastered moved on without her. She died in 1679, at the age of 70-9. Marie de Rohan never ruled a country, never wore royal jewels, and never claimed a crown, yet for decades she held more influence than many queens. She shaped decisions, stirred revolts, and altered the course of political history, all from behind the curtain. She was a mistress not of love alone, but of strategy, manipulation, and survival. In a world dominated by men, she carved her path through shadows, not through seduction, but through intellect and fear. She left no children to inherit her legacy, no memoirs to tell her side of the story. But her name, whispered in old records and forgotten diaries, still carries the weight of a woman who dared to play the most dangerous game of all politics in the time of kings. In the glittering salons of Versailles and the hidden chambers of power, royal mistresses held the gaze of kings. They were dressed in the finest silks, adorned with jewels that caught the candlelight, and spoken of with admiration. For a time, these women were idle symbols of beauty, elegance, and the very essence of court life. They were painted by the best artists, their portraits hung in palaces, their hairstyles copied by ladies across France. The public saw them not just as companions to kings, but as icons of style and culture. And yet, the very things that once made them admired would, over time, make them hated. It began with fascination. When Madame de Pompadour first appeared at Louis XV's side, she was loved by many. She promoted music, philosophy, and fine art. Poets wrote verses about her beauty. Ladies in Paris ordered gowns, à la Pompadour, wishing to mimic her fashion. Shops named perfumes after her. Her image sold porcelain and wallpaper. In an age where celebrity was tied to royalty, mistresses were among the most visible women in the kingdom. But fascination turned into frustration as the years passed and France faced more troubles, wars, debts, and political mistakes. People looked for someone to blame. Kings were too distant, and ministers too hidden. Mistresses, however, were right there in front of them, smiling from paintings, riding in gold-trimmed carriages, living in homes filled with luxury. Their lives became symbols of everything the common people could never have. It didn't matter whether they governed or not. Many were accused of ruining the country simply by being close to the throne. Pamphlets, once polite or playful, turned cruel. In the 18th century, especially during the reign of Louis XV, satirical writings exploded in number. These short, cheaply printed leaflets were passed hand to hand, read aloud in markets, and pinned to tavern walls. They were filled with biting words, mocking drawings, and accusations too shocking to ignore. Mistresses were accused of seducing kings into ruin, stealing from the treasury, selling state secrets, and even practicing witchcraft. Madame du Barry became one of the most viciously targeted women in print. She had come from a poor background, and her rise offended the noble class. The public never forgot her humble roots, and in the eyes of many, she didn't belong at court. Pamphlets called her a temptress, a thief, a traitor to France. Some drew her with snakes for hair. Others imagined her whispering into the king's ear while the country burned. Whether the stories were true didn't matter. The damage was already done. This shift from admiration to blame was not sudden. It grew with each royal mistake. When France lost its colonies, it was the mistress's fault. When taxes rose, she was said to be hoarding diamonds. When soldiers returned injured, they believed her laughter in Versailles was proof that no one cared. The farther the court drifted from the people, the more the people turned their anger toward the women who seemed to enjoy royal favor without ever earning it. Of course, most of the accusations were unfair. Many mistresses had no real power. Some tried to help. Madame de Pompadour supported hospitals and protected writers. Madame de Maintenon cared deeply about education. Even Madame du Barry gave generously to the poor near her estate. But in the eyes of the public, these efforts were invisible. All they saw were glittering gowns, extravagant parties, and endless privilege. The hatred became deeper with time by the late 1700s. As revolutionary ideas spread and economic conditions worsened, the court seemed more and more out of touch. Versailles had become a world of its own, decorated, insulated, and blind to the pain outside its gates. Mistresses, once adored by poets, were now mocked by mobs. The same lips that had whispered admiration now shouted for blood. And then the revolution came. It began slowly calls for reform, complaints about taxes, demands for a fairer system. But as tensions rose, violence followed. The Bastille was stormed. The monarchy was shaken. And in the wave of anger, mistresses became easy targets. Madame du Barry, the last official mistress of a French king, paid the price. Though she had long since left court, the people remembered her. She was arrested, tried for treason, and executed during the Reign of Terror. Her crime, sending letters to émigrés royalists who had fled France. Her trial lasted only hours. Her pleas were ignored. On the day of her death, she sobbed and begged for mercy. The crowd watched silently as the blade fell. But even before the revolution turned deadly, the writing had been on the wall. The age of mistresses was fading. In the new world being imagined by revolutionaries, there would be no room for royal favorites. Power would not rest in beauty or charm. The idea of a king keeping a mistress while his people starved became a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. The public, which had once idolized these women, now viewed them as parasites, cartoons. From the time show mistresses lounging while peasants toil. They are drawn with greedy eyes, dripping jewels, while France crumbles behind them. Some even blamed them for the wars with England, suggesting that if the king hadn't been distracted by love affairs, the country would have remained strong. These beliefs were exaggerated, often false, but they fed a growing rage. Even Queen Marie Antoinette was treated as though she were a mistress. Rumors claimed she had lovers, manipulated the king, and spent wildly. The fact that she was a queen did not protect her from the same kind of attacks that had once been reserved for mistresses. In the eyes of the people, royalty and its companions had all become one corrupt, uncaring class. What began as admiration had curdled into deep resentment. In the quiet of a Paris printing shop, satirical poets laughed as they wrote rhymes that mocked Versailles. In country inns, farmers spoke of those women who lived in golden rooms while their children went hungry. In crowded cities, revolutionaries gathered around pamphlets that showed the king's lovers dancing on coins and drinking from the blood of the poor. These images were not real, but they felt true to those who had suffered. Mistresses had become mirrors. To the poor, they reflected injustice. To the middle class, they reflected wasted opportunity. And to angry mobs, they reflected a system that had to be destroyed. So the era ended, not with quiet goodbyes or gentle retirement, but with public disgrace, trials, and executions. The women who had once smiled from balconies were now pulled through the streets. The pearls they wore were torn from their necks. The fans they had once carried became symbols of silence. No more soft laughter, no more whispered plans behind closed doors. For centuries, the royal mistress had been a constant, if unofficial, part of the French monarchy. She was never elected, rarely titled, and rarely formally recognized in law. Yet she was there, always hissing behind closed doors, appearing beside the king at masked balls, living in gilded rooms just steps away from power. The royal mistress was not just a woman, she was a tradition, and like the monarchy she served, her place in French life seemed eternal. But nothing lasts forever. As the 18th century drew to a close, the world changed rapidly. What had once seemed stable kingdoms, courts, and crowns began to crumble. New ideas spread across Europe. Philosophers spoke of liberty, equality, rights, and reason. And in France, where the divide between the rich and poor had grown dangerously wide, change came with fire and blood. The Palace of Versailles, once the most splendid home on earth, began to feel like a cage. Outside its golden gates, people starved. Inside, nobles danced. The disconnect grew deeper with each passing year. And in that growing distance, the royal mistress, once a figure of curiosity and desire, became a symbol of everything the Revolution wished to destroy. By 1789, when the French Revolution erupted, the role of the royal mistress was already fading. Louis XVI, unlike his predecessors, had no official mistress. He was awkward, private, and far more interested in locks and tools than affairs. His queen, Marie Antoinette, became the lightning rod for public hatred instead. Yet despite the king's quiet nature, the legacy of past mistresses loomed large in the public mind. The revolutionaries remembered Madame de Pompadour, whose influence stretched far into politics. They remembered Madame du Barry, the last public favorite of Louis XV, who had lived in luxury while ordinary people begged for bread. Her name still stung. Her image, drawn cruelly in pamphlets, became a target of anger. And so, when the revolution reached its most violent phase, the mistresses were not spared. Madame du Barry, long removed from court, was arrested in 1793. She had tried to live quietly at her country estate. She gave to charity. She avoided politics. But none of that mattered. Her jewels, her letters, her connections, real or imagined, were all used against her. She was accused of aiding enemies of the revolution. Her trial was short. Her pleas for mercy ignored. She was taken to the guillotine in December of that year. As her head fell, so too did the tradition she had represented. There would be no more royal mistresses after that. Not in France, not in public. The world had changed. The court of Versailles was empty. The monarchy had collapsed. The kings were gone, and with them, the lavish layered system of courtiers, favorites, and royal lovers. A tradition that had stretched back through centuries, through the Valois, the Bourbons, and countless reigns was suddenly broken. It had not always been so. In earlier times, royal mistresses had walked freely through palaces. They had their apartments, their staff, and their own influence. Agnes Sorel had once changed fashion in France. Diane de Poitiers had advised kings on war and diplomacy. Madame de Montespan had children with the king and lived at the center of Versailles. Madame de Pompadour had held the reins of culture in her hands. They had been powerful, admired, and feared. But all of that came with a cost. They were also hated, blamed, and often discarded. Their power depended entirely on the king's favor. The moment his gaze shifted, they were vulnerable. Some, like Madame de Maintenon, found safety in marriage. Others, like Pauline de Vintimille, died young. Still others, like Françoise Babou, met violent ends. And all of them, no matter how high they rose, were never entirely accepted. The revolution did not just tear down buildings, it tore down ideas. One of those ideas was the notion that a king could live above the people, guided by whims, passions, and private favorites. The mistress, in this new vision of society, had no place. She represented inequality, She represented corruption. She was too close to power, yet unchosen by the people. The new order demanded transparency, reason, and fairness. And though it was not always successful in delivering those things, it had no room for the old dance of secret influence. After 1793, no French king kept a mistress at court. Napoleon, who rose after the chaos, had lovers, yes, but never official mistresses in the old royal sense. His empire was built on military might and public image. He preferred a disciplined court. He demanded respectability. There would be no Pompadour at his side, no Dubarry to provoke scandal. Later, kings of France, including Louis XVIII and Charles X, ruled with caution. They had seen what happened when power mixed too freely with pleasure. Even when they had affairs, they were quiet, hidden. The age of open royal mistresses had ended not with a farewell, but with a sudden silence. The apartments once occupied by royal favorites were left empty. The lavish gifts once sent from king to mistress were no longer given. The salons, once filled with music and poetry, went quiet. Even the language changed. Where once the word maitress had a certain dignity, implying elegance and a position of influence, it now carried scandal and shame. The very idea of a royal mistress became something embarrassing, even dangerous. It was remembered only as a curiosity of a fallen world. Over time, the memory faded. Portraits were taken down. Letters were lost or hidden. Histories of France, written in the 19th century, often skipped over the mistresses altogether or mentioned them only in footnotes. The women who had once helped shape French culture and court life were slowly erased from the grand story, and yet their legacy remains, not in palaces or statues, but in small traces. In the gardens they planted, in the salons they hosted, in the fashions they introduced, in the letters they wrote, and in the quiet warnings whispered from one generation to the next. That power taken without protection can be dangerous. That beauty can be both a gift and a weapon. That closeness to the throne offers no promise of safety. The royal mistresses of France never wore crowns. They did not sign decrees, lead armies, or sit on thrones. Yet, century after century, they moved the world around them. Through whispered influence and quiet rebellion, through beauty, wit, and sometimes scandal, they shaped the courts of kings and the mood of an entire nation. Even after their names faded from official records, their presence lingered. And today, their stories still draw curiosity, not for their titles, but for their trials, not only for their glamour, but for their resilience. They lived in a world built for kings, not women. In that world, power belonged to men, passed down by blood, preserved through war, and performed in public. But these women operated in the shadows. They learned how to survive in palaces where smiles could betray, and silk-covered doors could hide danger. They adapted, adjusted, and endured. Each of them left a different kind of legacy. Agnes Sorel, the first officially recognized royal mistress, changed more than just her relationship with Charles VII. She changed court culture. In the 15th century, when she appeared in daring gowns that exposed her shoulders and breasts, she set a new standard of fashion. It was bold, even shocking, but it became the style. The court followed her lead, and in doing so, France began to separate itself from medieval restraint. Her fashion choices symbolized something deeper. That beauty, when combined with presence, could guide taste and influence tradition. Diane de Poitiers, mistress to Henry II, brought sophistication to a new level. Her gardens were among the most admired in France. She restored Château de Chenonceau, turning it into a jewel of Renaissance architecture. Her letters reveal a careful mind, always aware of her position, always working to maintain favor without overstepping. Even after Henry's death, her artistic and architectural choices remained as part of France's cultural heritage. Gabrielle d'Estrées left a different kind of legacy. She didn't live long, and she never became queen, though Henry IV had planned it, but she had helped push him toward peace. She urged him to convert to Catholicism, not out of faith, but to end the civil war tearing France apart. Her influence helped calm a divided kingdom. In her story, we see how a quiet conversation, shared behind closed doors, could change the course of a nation's history. And then there were women like Madame de Montespan. She was not content to stand beside the king and look beautiful. She wanted more. She held political sway during the height of Louis XIV's reign, influencing ministers, shaping alliances, and even advising on matters of religion. But her legacy is stained with darker ink. The affair of the poisons, a scandal that linked her name to sorcery, poison, and death. Though much of it may have been rumor, the whispers were enough to drive her from court. Yet even her fall from grace is part of her legacy. It reminds us how power without official protection left women vulnerable to public destruction. Madame de Maintenon, her quieter successor, left a different mark. She reshaped court morals and refocused the court on religious and educational reform. Though she had no official title, many believed she was secretly married to Louis XIV. She helped raise his illegitimate children and pushed for the founding of schools for poor noble girls. Her influence, though subtle, outlasted her presence. Perhaps no mistress is more remembered than Madame de Pompadour. She became a force beyond the bedroom. She supported philosophers, funded artists, and commissioned architectural marvels. She stood at the center of Enlightenment culture, though she was hated by many in her time, especially for her perceived political influence. Today she is studied as a woman who understood how to blend elegance with intellect. Her name lives on, not through scandal, but through legacy she left behind: ideas, images, and a vision of a more refined France. Even those whose lives were cut short contributed to the changing image of women in power. Pauline de Vintimille, young and tragic, revealed the vulnerability of even the most protected women at court. Her death in childbirth and the neglect shown to her body stripped away the illusion that mistresses were always honored or safe. Her story remains a reminder of how fleeting their privileges could be. Madame du Barry, the last official mistress of a French king, may have suffered the most dramatic end. Yet even in death, she showed something of the transformation of public roles. Her fall mirrored the fall of the monarchy. Her execution was not just personal, it symbolized the rejection of everything the old court represented. And yet, her story remains. Her taste in jewelry, her patronage of artisans, and her defiant final words have survived in archives, paintings, and memory. Others, like Françoise Babou and Marie de Rohan, carried their legacies not through court, fashion, or royal affection, but through daring and danger. They conspired, plotted, and resisted the rules forced upon them. They were punished harshly for it, one murdered in the street, the other exiled time and again, but they revealed that some mistresses wanted more than protection. They wanted control. These women are no longer studied only for their beauty or their lovers. Historians now examine their letters, their decisions, and their relationships not as side notes to kings, but as primary sources of social and political history. They reveal how power worked, how it moved in silence, behind curtains and across pillow talk. They show us the limits of agency and the courage it took to navigate a world where one wrong word could end everything. Their stories also speak to modern questions. What does it mean to live in the shadow of power? What happens when influence comes without formal authority? How do we judge women who worked within a system designed to keep them quiet, but who found ways to speak anyway? They were not saints. Many of them were manipulated. Some were cruel, some abandoned children or ruined rivals. But they were also survivors, women caught in a machine that rewarded charm and punished missteps with exile or death. They understood the stakes. They played the game, knowing it could end at any moment. And despite everything, they left their mark in the architecture they inspired, in the arts they supported, in the court customs they shaped, and in the way they forced future generations to ask, what place should desire, beauty, and ambition have in the halls of power? Even today, their names appear in museums, on plaques, in books, and in dramas. Their stories are reimagined, reinterpreted. Some are romanticized, others are questioned, but none are forgotten. They are remembered not because they ruled, but because they endured, not because they were perfect, but because they were human, flawed, brilliant, afraid, brave. They were born into worlds they did not shape, but they shaped what they could, and somehow, centuries later, we still whisper their names. Power was never safe, and love was never simple. The royal mistresses of France lived in a world of gold and danger, of whispered promises and public judgment. They were never queens, yet they bore the weight of a crown's shadow. They shaped history not with armies or laws, but with presence, with influence that came at a cost. They laughed in candlelight, wept behind locked doors, and walked narrow paths lined with envy and fear. Their lives were adorned with silk and sorrow, their fates never fully in their own hands, and yet they endured. They were more than companions to kings. They were symbols of beauty, of ambition, of vulnerability in a world that praised them in the morning and condemned them by night. Their stories, now quiet and half forgotten, remind us that behind every title lies a human life, complex, fragile, and fleeting. So, as we leave the halls of Versailles and the fading perfume of a distant past, let their bittersweet stories rest with us. Let them drift into memory like a candle burning low. And as your eyes grow heavy and the world outside falls silent, let their quiet journeys carry you gently into sleep. Thank you for spending this time with us. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a like and subscribe to Boring History for sleep, for more calm journeys through the forgotten corners of the past. Good night.